They laughed as I took the blame for a $70K mistake my supervisor made. He told me to own it like a pro. So I did, with a 15-page report and a secretly recorded confession he forgot about. Then compliance heard it, looked at me, and fired him on the spot. I swear I can still feel the way the break room went silent for half a second before everyone burst out laughing again. Like my crying was some kind of punchline. I was sitting at the metal table, hands shaking, mascara smudged, trying to breathe through the panic of being told I just lost the company $70,000. I remember staring at the microwave clock, trying to make sense of how my life had cratered in less than an hour. It didn't matter that the mistake wasn't mine. It didn't matter that I had proof it wasn't mine. All that mattered was that my supervisor, Mark, looked me dead in the face and said, "Own it like a pro or you're out." Then he smirked. And everyone watching took their cue from him. I hadn't even processed the shock yet. My chest was tight, painful. It felt like being punched in slow motion. I had never seen that version of him, so cold, so smug, like he'd been waiting for a chance to bury me. And when he turned to walk out of the break room, he tossed one more line over his shoulder. "Make sure your report is clean. I don't want to see your emotions all over it." I don't know why that's the line that broke me. Maybe because he said it loudly, right in front of people I thought were at least neutral toward me. Maybe because those same people started whispering the second he left. Maybe because the sound of my own quiet crying just made them laugh harder, like it was entertainment. But I sat there and wiped my face. And I made a choice. Fine. If he wanted me to own it like a pro, then I'd do exactly that. I'd own it in a way he never saw coming. By the time I stood up, the panic was gone. Something colder took its place. And the truth is, I think something in me snapped that day. Not in a dramatic, movie way, more like something finally straightened inside me. I wasn't going to be thrown under a bus for a mistake he made just because he decided I was the easiest one to blame. He'd messed up, he'd covered it up, he'd used me as the shield, but he'd also forgotten one thing: I document everything. The more I thought about it, the clearer the plan became. I didn't even have to dig far. Half our meetings were recorded for training. Our chats were logged. And when he cornered me that morning and said he needed me to take the fall because compliance doesn't audit newbies, he didn't know my phone was still recording from transcribing a client call. He told me to write the incident report. He told me to take responsibility. And I did. I wrote a 15-page report with screenshots, timestamps, email chains, and a full breakdown of how the error happened and exactly who caused it. I attached the audio file at the end under a simple header: additional context, per supervisor request. The next morning, I was sitting across from the head of compliance, a woman who normally looked bored out of her mind. But not today. Today she listened to the audio with her jaw clenched, her face turning a slow, furious red. When it ended, she didn't speak at first. She just stared at me, then leaned forward, lowered her voice, and said, "Do you understand what this means for him?" I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, she pushed her chair back, stood up, and said something that made my heart drop straight through the floor. "Stay right here. Don't move. We need to bring someone else in for this." And that's when everything really started to unravel. I didn't always feel scared walking into that building. Honestly, when I first started at Fairview Analytics, I thought I'd finally found a place where I could grow. I was hired as a junior data coordinator, nothing glamorous, but steady, predictable work. I was the kind of person who color codes spreadsheets for fun, so the job fit me in this weirdly satisfying way. And at first, Mark wasn't a nightmare. He wasn't great, but he wasn't the monster he eventually let himself become. He was one of those supervisors who acted like he was too important for the job he actually had. He always talked about when he'd become director, not if. Everything with him was about appearances: how he looked to upper management, how he sounded in meetings, who he could casually name-drop to seem connected. He loved looking competent. He hated doing actual work, and that's where I came in. I picked things up fast, so he started handing me more and more of what he called overflow. Translation: anything he didn't want to deal with. Most of the time I didn't mind. It made me feel useful. It made me feel like maybe he saw potential in me. Looking back, I was stupid. Not naive, just too hopeful for my own good. Because every time he praised me, it was in this performative way that made other people think he was some great mentor. He'd say things like, I'm giving her bigger projects because I want to challenge her. But in private, he'd dump tasks on me with almost no instructions and then disappear for the rest of the day. I didn't realize he'd been building a pattern, a record, something he could twist later if he needed to. The first red flag should have been the client meeting where he introduced one of my reports as something he'd worked tirelessly on over the weekend. He didn't even look at me when he said it. He acted like I wasn't in the room. I remember sitting there, heart pounding, not knowing if I should speak up or stay quiet. I stayed quiet. Big mistake. But the thing about patterns is they snowball. Once he realized no one questioned him, he got bolder. He started letting me handle client calls, then whole projects, then the postmortems. It wasn't long before I was basically doing 2 jobs for the price of one. And when I asked about a raise, all he said was, "Earn it first." That was his mantra. Earn it. Meanwhile, he took credit for everything I did, and I let him because I didn't think it mattered. I thought eventually the right person would notice the truth. What I didn't know then was that he'd been making tiny notes about me, comments he'd casually dropped to management about me being emotional, overwhelmed, still adjusting. He'd frame them as concern, but they were seeds. He was planting a version of me that he could use later. The unstable junior who needed guidance. And I guess the biggest mistake I ever made was trusting that he wouldn't throw me to the wolves if he screwed up. Then the $70,000 mistake happened. It wasn't just some typo or forgotten form. It was a breach in the vendor reporting system, something he was supposed to verify personally, something he signed off on without checking, something that could trigger an external audit. When the numbers didn't match and the warning flags went up, he panicked. He panicked hard. But instead of admitting he messed up, he came into the office early, pulled our shared access logs, and found one small data pull I'd done for a separate report. Something he could twist, something he could frame as the cause. I remember the way he looked at me that morning. Too calm, too prepared, he'd already decided I was the sacrifice. And sitting in that break room, crying while people laughed, I finally understood the truth. He'd been building to this moment for months. The day after the break room humiliation, everything felt different at work. Not louder or quieter, just heavier, like the walls themselves knew something was off. People kept glancing at me, then looking away fast, like they were afraid I'd ask them to pick a side. Most of them had already picked one anyway, whether they realized it or not. Mark acted like nothing had happened. Of course he did. He walked past my desk with his travel mug, humming like he hadn't just tried to nuke my entire career. He even stopped and asked, "Did you finish that report?" In this fake-friendly tone that made my stomach clench. I slid the folder toward him without a word. He didn't even open it. He just said, "Good. I'll take it from here," and walked straight to the manager's office. That should have been the moment I panicked. But honestly, I felt weirdly calm, almost detached, because he thought he was in control of the story. He really believed he had pushed me into a corner where I'd either quit or break down. He had no idea he'd handed me the exact rope he was about to hang himself with. Around 10:30 a.m., my email pinged. Meeting with compliance 2 p.m. Mandatory, no panic, not yet. But the stares got worse. People whispering near the printer. 2 coworkers suddenly closing a chat window when I walked by. One of the senior analysts giving me this pity look that made something in my chest twist. Mark didn't look worried at all. If anything, he looked smug, like he'd arranged the whole thing. Like 2 p.m. was going to be the moment his problem employee got quietly escorted out. I guess what he didn't consider was that compliance doesn't do quiet. Right before lunch, he came over to my desk again and said, "Remember, keep it simple. Admit the oversight, don't drag anyone else into it." He said it softly, like a threat disguised as advice. Then he added, "And don't bring emotions into it. They respect professionalism." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "I'll bring exactly what they need." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his face. Not fear, not yet, but definitely confusion. Maybe he sensed I wasn't as broken as he'd expected. At 1:55 p.m., I walked into the compliance office, and everything changed immediately. There were 2 chairs set up. Only one was for me. The head of compliance, Linda, was at the table with a printed copy of my report. The last page was visible, and I could see the beginning of the transcript header. My heart kicked once hard, but I kept my face straight. She didn't say hello, she didn't offer a seat. She just tapped the folder and said, Where did you get this recording? I explained. Calm, factual, nothing extra. And as I spoke, her eyes narrowed in this way I'd never seen before, like she wasn't just listening, she was connecting dots faster than I could track. Then she pressed play. Listening to his voice fill the room, his exact words, his smug tone, the part where he said, "If this gets pinned on me, I'm dead, just take it. You're new, no one will question you," made my hands shake under the table. Linda didn't blink. She didn't breathe. She just stared at the wall like she was doing math that ended in someone getting fired. When the recording ended, she finally leaned back, folded her arms, and said, "You understand what this implies, right?" I nodded. She didn't nod back. She just stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "Stay here," she said. "Do not move, do not touch your phone, do not speak to anyone." My throat went dry. "Why?" She opened the door, turned to look at me, and said, "Because this is no longer a compliance issue. This just escalated to something much bigger." Then she left, and the person she brought back with her would change everything. The person Linda brought back wasn't from HR, wasn't a director, wasn't even someone from our building. It was the company's internal auditor. A guy named Stevenson, who everyone only ever talked about in lowered voices, like he was some mythic figure who appeared when careers were about to be ripped open. He walked in wearing a navy suit and an expression so flat it felt surgical. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't introduce himself. He just sat down across from me, opened my report, and said, "Start from the beginning." So I did. Every detail, every instruction, every message, every moment Mark cornered me about owning the mistake. Stevenson didn't react to any of it, not even the audio. He just kept flipping pages like he was reading a manual for a machine that wasn't working. When I finished, Linda leaned against the wall with her arms crossed, watching him like she was waiting for a verdict. He finally closed the report and said something I did not expect. "This isn't the first time we've seen his name." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer me. Instead, he looked at Linda and said, "Where is he now?" "In his office," she said quietly. Stevenson stood up, gathering the folder. "Do not let him leave the building." My pulse spiked. "Wait, what is going on? What does this mean?" He paused at the door, looked at me directly for the first time, and said, "We've been tracking irregularities tied to your supervisor for months. Your report connects dots we didn't have access to before." Irregularities, months, dots. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Linda stayed behind for a moment while he left. She sat down across from me, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked almost sympathetic. "You didn't cause this," she said, "but what you uncovered might be bigger than you realize." My voice shook. "How big?" She hesitated. "Then financial misconduct, misreporting, possible fraud." I froze. Fraud. The word hit me like a physical blow. Mark wasn't just incompetent. He wasn't just lazy. He wasn't just throwing me under the bus. He'd been using me, and maybe using other people before me. But the real twist didn't hit until 10 minutes later. Because while Linda was explaining what would happen next, there was a loud commotion in the hallway, voices raised, footsteps pounding, someone saying, "Sir, you can't just walk out." I stood up, heart thudding, just as the door swung open. A security officer stood there, holding Mark by the arm. And Mark, my smug, overconfident supervisor, looked terrified. Red-faced, sweating, eyes wild. Not angry, not annoyed, panicked. He pointed at me immediately. "She set me up, she manipulated the data. She's been out to get me from the start. You don't understand, she's unstable." Linda cut him off cold. "Enough. You're being detained until the audit team finishes their preliminary review." "Detained?" he screeched. "You can't detain me." But they could. And they did. Security escorted him down the hall as he kept shouting, twisting, trying to get free. Every employee in the department watched, jaws dropped, whispering in shock. And then, right as they turned the corner, he threw one last look back at me. A look that made my stomach twist, because it wasn't anger, or disbelief, or confusion. It was recognition, like he'd realized something important, something dangerous. And the next words he yelled confirmed it. "You don't know what you just got yourself into." Everyone froze. Linda let out a slow breath and murmured, more to herself than to me, "Oh God, he knows we found the other files." Other files? Before I could ask, she turned to me with a seriousness that made my skin crawl and said, "From this point forward, do not trust anyone who is close to him." I didn't know it yet, but that warning wasn't about workplace politics. It was about survival. I didn't go back to my desk after that. Linda insisted I stay in the compliance office while the audit team tore through Mark's files, emails, access logs, everything. She said it was to keep the process clean, but the way she kept glancing toward the hallway told me there was more to it. By late afternoon, the office felt colder, quieter, like the building itself knew something was being uncovered that shouldn't have existed in the first place. At one point, I asked if I could at least get my laptop to finish some end-of-month tasks. Linda shook her head. Your workstation is part of the review now. That didn't calm me. It made my skin prickle. Hours passed. People peeked into the compliance wing but didn't dare step in. Word had clearly spread that something big was happening. Bigger than the $70K mistake. Bigger than me. Bigger than Mark. When the internal auditor finally came back, he carried a thick binder that hadn't existed that morning. He set it down on the table with a dull, heavy thud. This, he said, came from your supervisor's private drive. I stared at it. What is it? But he didn't answer me. He flipped it open. What I saw inside made my whole body go cold. There were reports, dozens of them, spanning nearly 2 years, all signed by different junior employees, all containing errors that looked suspiciously similar to the one he'd tried to pin on me. At the back was a sheet with employees' names. Some I recognized, some had quit, one had been fired. Beside each name was a column labeled, Risk Tolerance Score. Mine was highlighted. My score was written in red ink. Next to it, high. Emotional, likely to panic, low resistance. My brain stopped there for a second, stuck on those words, unable to process the rest. This wasn't just a list, it was a playbook, a plan for who he could sacrifice if something blew back on him. And from the looks of it, he'd done this before. My voice came out small. What is this? Linda answered instead of Stevenson. Your supervisor has been manipulating junior staff for years. Whenever his numbers didn't line up or an audit flag appeared, he'd shift the blame onto someone below him, usually just enough to dodge deeper review. I swallowed, throat tight. And the company never caught it. We weren't looking in the right places, she said. He was careful, not brilliant, just strategic. Strategic. The word felt poisonous. That's when something inside me clicked. I wasn't just fighting for my job anymore. I wasn't even fighting for my sanity. I was fighting for every person on that list, every name he'd crushed, every career he'd sabotaged to save himself. The fear I'd felt all day turned into something sharper, something steadier. Resolve, I leaned forward. What happens now? Stevenson looked at me, and for the first time his expression shifted, barely, but enough to show he was impressed. We build a case, he said. A full one, not just for internal action, potentially external. You mean criminal charges? He didn't blink. If the evidence continues to align, yes. I felt my heart slam against my ribs. Linda added, but we need more, hard evidence. Patterns, documentation, you were closest to him, you know how he operated. Your insight might fill in gaps we've been struggling with. I could feel the shape of it forming. A plan. A retaliation that wasn't petty or impulsive. Something precise, methodical, something he'd never see coming because he'd never assumed I had the spine for it. I took a slow breath. Tell me what you need. Stevenson slid a legal pad in front of me. We need every detail you remember. Every time he deviated from protocol, every time he pressured you, every time he reassigned something that didn't make sense. I nodded. But inside, I was already thinking beyond that. If Mark had a playbook, then I needed one too, because something about this still didn't add up. His panic. That look he gave me. The warning he shouted. He hadn't reacted like someone caught for petty fraud. He reacted like someone whose real secret was still hidden. And if I wanted justice, real, crushing, final, I had to find it first. So while Stevenson laid out what he needed from me, I began outlining something of my own. My revenge wouldn't just expose him, it would dismantle him, piece by piece. I stayed at the office until almost 9 p.m., long after most people had gone home. Linda kept checking on me, bringing water, reminding me I didn't have to push myself. But she didn't understand, this wasn't just about helping the audit team anymore. This was personal. I filled page after page on the legal pad. Dates, quotes, patterns, little things I hadn't even realized were red flags at the time. I listed the days he'd pressured me to sign off on tasks I hadn't completed, the weird, training check-ins that were really cover-ups, the unexplained reassignments. The times he'd quietly changed access permissions and then changed them back. By the time I stopped, my hand was cramped and my throat hurt from talking. Stevenson scanned what I'd written with a tight, approving nod. This is significant. But even then, in the middle of all that progress, something kept gnawing at me. That list, the names, the color-coded risk scores. What happened to the people with low tolerance? Why were some names crossed out? Why did the notes beside certain employees trail off mid-sentence? I didn't want to know the answer. But I also couldn't stop thinking about it. Around 9:20, Linda excused herself to call the legal department. Stevenson left to coordinate a forensic data pull. For the first time all day, I was alone. And that's when I saw it. My email pinged with a notification from an account I didn't recognize. Subject: you should have SDAYED quiet. My stomach dropped. I clicked it. The email contained only one attachment, a single PDF. I hovered over it, heart pounding, but finally forced myself to open it. And that's when everything inside me turned to ice. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a document. A file labeled with my name. My full name. And inside, a draft. A draft of a termination report. Already filled out. Already framed. Already twisted into a narrative where I was unstable, negligent, dismissive of protocol, and showing signs of emotional volatility affecting job performance. The date at the top. 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks before the $70K mistake. This wasn't damage control. This wasn't panic. This had been planned before he made the error, before he blamed me, before the break room humiliation. He had been building a case to get rid of me long before any of this happened. My blood went cold. I felt physically dizzy. Because the only reason someone prepares a termination report weeks in advance is if they're planning something that requires a scapegoat. And I wasn't just the scapegoat. I had been the target. I was still staring at the screen when Linda came back, mid-sentence about legal procedures, and then she stopped. "What's wrong?" I turned the laptop so she could see. She didn't speak for 5 whole seconds. Then she whispered, "Oh my God." Stevenson came back a moment later and she showed him too. His reaction was different. He didn't panic. He didn't even look surprised. He looked disturbed. "That's not his writing," Stevenson said quietly. Both of us froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. He pointed at the signature line. "That signature isn't his. He doesn't sign like that. He signs with a hook at the end. This is someone imitating him." My breath caught. "So someone else was helping him?" Linda asked. "No," Stevenson said. "Someone was directing him." I felt the room tilt. Directing him, as in someone above him, someone with power. Someone who could create fake termination reports and bury junior employees without detection. Before anyone could say another word, Stevenson's phone rang. He checked the caller ID and said, "It's the external auditor." External. Why was an external auditor calling at 9:30 at night? He stepped out to take the call. Linda and I sat in silence until he came back 5 minutes later, face pale, lips pressed tight. He closed the door, took a breath, looked at both of us. "There's another account," he said. "A shadow profile with elevated permissions. Someone's been using your supervisor to funnel bad numbers through the system. Someone higher up." My skin prickled. "Who?" He slid a printed email across the table. "We don't know yet, but whoever it is, they just wiped the account." Wiped, as in destroyed evidence. And the timestamp? It happened 2 minutes after I opened the PDF. This wasn't just bigger than Mark. Someone else was involved. Someone who knew what we'd found. Someone who wasn't afraid to erase evidence in real time. Linda whispered, "This just became dangerous." And the moment she said it, we all realized the same thing. Mark wasn't the real villain. He was the pawn, and the person controlling him was still out there. The building felt too quiet, too still, like the air itself was listening. Stevenson didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stared at the erased account timestamp, jaw tight, breathing slow. Linda paced the small conference room like she was trying to walk off a nightmare. I just sat there, frozen, because it hit me all at once. If someone higher up was wiping evidence in real time, they were watching us. I swallowed hard. Who has access to elevated permissions like that? Directors? VPs? Linda stopped pacing. Stevenson didn't look up. "Only 2 people in this company have the power to create shadow accounts," he said. "The CFO and the head of operations." My lungs tightened. The CFO was barely ever in our building. but the head of operations. That was Caroline Hale, Mark's mentor, his career angel, as he called her. The woman he bragged about getting lunch with once a week. The same woman who interviewed me when I was hired and said she liked my work ethic. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. Linda whispered, "No, no, it can't be her. She's been here 20 years. Stevenson finally looked at us. That's exactly why it could be her. Tenured power is the hardest to track. But that wasn't the horrifying part. The horrifying part was what came next. Because Stevenson pulled out another printed sheet, something from earlier in the audit, and slid it toward me. "This," he said quietly, "is one of the deleted reports we managed to recover before the wipe." My hands shook as I reached for it. It was a financial summary, one I'd never seen before. It showed small discrepancies, tiny ones, amounts shaved off here and there across multiple vendor payments. $200 from one invoice, $450 from another, $120 here, $300 there, nothing huge on its own. But together, over 3 years, it totaled more than $1.8 million. My breath stopped. Linda pressed her fingers to her mouth. "Someone's been siphoning funds." "Correct," Stevenson said. "And they've been hiding the trail by pinning audit flags on junior staff. When a discrepancy popped up, your supervisor created a narrative, one that blamed an employee who would either quit or crumble under pressure." My head spun. "That's why the risk scores existed," I whispered. "He wasn't rating performance, he was rating who he could sacrifice." Stevenson nodded. "And someone above him used that system to keep the siphoning hidden." Everything clicked all at once. The fake termination report dated weeks before the $70K error. The erased shadow account. The way Mark panicked the moment he realized we'd found more than just his mistake. The way he shouted, "You don't know what you just got yourself into." Because he wasn't afraid of losing his job, he was afraid of her. "What did she do?" I asked, barely hearing my own voice. Stevenson's expression darkened in a way that made the room feel colder. "She used him." He said it like a death sentence. "She groomed him into being her shield, someone ambitious but insecure, someone who needed validation, someone who would follow orders without understanding the consequences." Linda whispered, "My God," and then he said the thing that changed everything for me. "She picked you because you were too competent, not emotional, not weak. Competent. Someone who might notice things she didn't want noticed." Like a memory slamming back, I heard her voice from my interview. "I like people who work quietly, who don't stir things." My stomach flipped. "This wasn't about the mistake," I whispered, "or even the fraud." "No," Stevenson said. "This was about removing you before you saw something you weren't supposed to." I felt cold all over. The villain wasn't Mark. It was a woman with power, seniority, reputation, and decades of influence. Someone who had built a system of siphoning funds, so calculated and quiet that she only needed one thing to keep it running. Scapegoats. People like me, people with clean records and no political power. People she could crush without leaving fingerprints. Linda's voice trembled. "If she knows we're onto her," Stevenson cut her off. "She knows." And then he looked at me. "Which means she's already planning her next move." A chill ran straight through me, because for the first time I realized this wasn't just about revenge. This was about survival. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the wiped account timestamp, the forged signature, the list of junior employees who'd been fed to the wolves before me. And over all of it, I kept hearing Stevenson's warning. "She's already planning her next move." But so was I by morning. I'd made my decision. If Caroline Hale had spent years building a maze of fake reports, shadow accounts, and disposable scapegoats, then the only way to take her down was to turn her own maze against her. I got to the office before sunrise. Linda and Stevenson were already there, bleary-eyed but alert. They looked surprised when I walked in carrying two things, one a thermos of coffee, two a USB drive. "I brought everything," I said. "And I mean everything." Overnight, I dug through old backups on my personal laptop, training recordings, voice memos, screenshots I'd taken months ago when Mark had sent me bizarre instructions I didn't trust. None of it felt important before. Now it was a gold mine. We spent the next 4 hours stitching together a narrative so airtight it couldn't be spun, twisted, or blamed on anyone else. Patterns, timelines, voice clips, audit flags, access logs, and the crown jewel, Metadata that proved Caroline herself had accessed the shadow account at times when Mark wasn't even in the building. Stevenson stared at one of the recovered logs for a long time before whispering, "She's done. This is enough to bury her 6 feet deep." But I wasn't done. Because Caroline's power didn't come from her position, it came from fear. People stayed quiet because they were afraid she'd destroy them, but fear only works in the dark. So we stepped into the light. By noon, the head of legal, the CFO, internal audit, compliance, and the company's external forensic team were all gathered in the executive conference room. I'd never even been allowed on that floor before. Caroline walked in last. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect smile, until she saw me. Then the smile cracked. She didn't sit, she didn't greet anyone. She just stared at the binder in front of her, the one with her name on the tab. The CFO opened the meeting. Stevenson did the walkthrough. Linda presented the access logs. Legal explained the forged termination report. And when it was my turn, I laid out every piece of evidence showing exactly how the fraud worked, and exactly how she'd used Mark as a puppet. Caroline didn't speak until the very end. Then, in a voice that sounded frayed around the edges, she said, "You don't understand the pressures of running a department. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made." I stared at her, not scared, not shaking, just done. "Sacrifices," I repeated. "You mean people, you mean careers, you mean anyone who couldn't fight back." She didn't deny it. She didn't even look ashamed. She just said, "I protect this company." The CFO leaned back, disgust plain on his face. "No, you protect yourself." The vote was unanimous. Effective immediately, Caroline Hale was terminated, escorted out by security, and placed under investigation for financial misconduct, fraud, and retaliatory practices. Mark didn't fare better. He'd already confessed under pressure. Turns out fear makes people very honest. He was fired, banned from the industry pending the results of the investigation, and last I heard, preparing for a very expensive legal battle. As for me, my record was cleared. My position was reinstated, and the company offered me a promotion on the spot. I didn't take it. Instead, I took a severance package big enough to start over somewhere that didn't smell like fear and manipulation, and I left on my own terms, head high. On my last day, I walked past the break room, the same place they laughed as I cried. This time, people went silent for an entirely different reason, and I just smiled. Because I didn't just survive their game, I rewrote the rules.